Hi everyone, welcome back to The Mystic in the Woods. I'm Kate, and today we are going to talk a little bit about how deity work can go hand in hand with a shadow work practice. Now, there are a lot of really great videos already out there on what deity work is, how to get started, all that kind of stuff. My intention with this video is to hit it at a slightly different angle with an emphasis on shadow work. Having said that, if there's anything else within the realm of deity work that you would like me to cover or you have questions about, please don't hesitate to put those in the comments below. Now, when I say deity work, I am generally referring to working with a being such as a being traditionally, I should say, referred to as a deity, a god, a goddess, an ascended master, and even an angel or a goetic inferno. And working with that being in an attempt to learn, to heal something, to grow, to co-create something, or even just have a mutually beneficial relationship. Whether or not it is the same thing as worship highly depends on who you're talking to and how they go about deity work. Now, when we talk about deity work specifically in relation to shadow work, we are talking about working with that deity to navigate the shadow, to find and heal wounds, patterns, and learn to integrate that into our daily lives. Now, you can look at these beings as separate beings who sit outside of you with their own consciousness, or you can look at them as archetypal pieces of yourself, pieces of your psyche, or of course, you can look at them as the as above, so below, as within, so without, and say it's not all that different anyway, right? Now, archetypes are something that I think can be really helpful in this conversation, even if you are somebody who believes that they sit firmly outside of you with your own consciousness. And that is because human beings have been teaching and learning and growing and passing on messages and morals through stories and characters and archetypes since the beginning of time, right? This is why we have so many fairy tales that have just continued to work their way through society and change and grow over time. This is why every culture that I know of around the world has their own folklore, because there is real power within storytelling. So when we look at archetypes, Carl Jung is of course only one of the people who have talked about archetypes, but he is one of the people who talked about them a lot. Now, Carl Jung saw the psyche as divided into three pieces: your consciousness, the things you're aware of, your personal unconscious, so your personal shadow, the thing sitting in your own unconscious, and then the collective unconscious. When he talked about archetypes, and I better just read this quote so I don't screw it up, he defined archetypes as form concepts that exist in and define a field of consciousness which is beyond time, space, and the individual. Collectively, we all hold various archetypes. We all understand archetypes. They are patterns of behavior or relationship or abilities sitting in this collective unconscious. Now, the tarot is a collection of archetypes, especially the major arcana and the court cards. These are just a collection of archetypes that can show up differently but cross-culturally. So when we look at a character, or not a character, but a being or an archetype like Mother Mary with lots of compassion, we see that mirrored in Kuan Yin. We see that mirrored in Tara. We see that compassion mirrored across cultures in various forms. Now, when we talk about, for example, let's talk about the archetype of the mother. We all know what that archetype feels like. We can't see it, but we know what it feels like, and we know what it feels like to be missing it. To be missing it in our lives, or to be missing it in ourselves. Now, I can understand and embody and learn about the mother archetype through myself as a mother, through my relationship with my own mother, by watching other women in my lives mother. I can also learn about the mother archetype and the wounding that it holds by looking at mother figures, mother deities. So again, we have any goddess or deity figure that you associate with motherhood. So again, Mother Mary would be a very traditional or I'm going to say easily accessible, just because if you are in Western society, then you're probably at least vaguely familiar with the Christian pantheon, right? So Mother Mary is a archetype. She could be considered an archetype. She could be considered an actual being or an actual historical figure. You could call her an ascended master. You could call her a goddess who sits outside of you. But by learning through her story, by interacting with her as an archetype or as a being, we can learn about the archetype of the mother, the wounds that it carries, and how to heal that within ourselves. Now, I can't remember where I heard or who I heard say this. If anybody knows, please let me know in the comments below. But they said something like, you can't see an archetype, but you can see the symbols that point to it, or the symbols that like surround it. So along those lines, again, this is where deity work can come in, because while we can't see an archetype, we can see and have something to tangibly grab onto in the stories, the myths, the energies of various deities across different cultures, within different pantheons, and within your own life. Now, one of the ways that we can do this is we can do this by talking about divine light and divine dark. Now, I've talked about this before, especially on my Instagram. I think I've talked about this in one of our videos here too, is that dark and light are not synonyms for good and evil, or good and bad. When we leave the conversation there, not only are we playing into an inherently racist concept, we are also, it's wildly incomplete to leave it at good and bad and light and dark, okay? Light and dark energy can be equally divine and equally wounded. Now, this is one of the reasons that sometimes I don't even like the paradigm of dark and light. However, I do think that it gives our human brain something to hold on to and to understand. So if we can bring it beyond good and bad, we can really start to learn from the dark and the light paradigm. Again, both are necessary. Both can show up in equally healthy, integrated ways and wounded ways. And we can see this divine light versus, I don't want to say verse, but divine light and divine dark play out in each of us as individuals, and we can see that mirrored in various archetypal figures like deities, like angels, like demons, like ascended masters, probably even saints. I just don't personally have a lot of experience working with saints, so that would be a separate topic, and I wouldn't be your best person for that. But I'm sure we can see this show up in there as well. So what we generally see is light would be angels, ascended masters, right? Dark would be underworld deities. It would be goetic infernals, fallen angels, demons. Now, neither of the beings on either end of this spectrum are evil. They are all holding various archetypal stories, myths, patterns, wounds, aspects of the human experience. And they can help us to understand those human pieces on a deeper level when we work with them in our shadow work. So light beings, for example, when light shows up in an integrated, healthy way, yes, we are compassionate and we are loving, but we still have boundaries. Okay, wounded light shows up like self-sacrifice to the point of sabotage, of self-sabotage, of self-betrayal. For just as one example of wounded light. Wounded dark shows up as, let's talk about anger for a second. As a really good example of this. And I have a lot of information coming out on the 7 deadly sins soon, where we're going to really see this polarity between light and dark and how they both show up wounded. So let's talk about anger as one of the 7 deadly sins. We always think of the 7 deadly sins as being too much, right? If you're too angry, that would be a problem. Too angry would be wounded darkness. That's where we are letting our anger, of course, leak out and hurt the people around us, right? It's when we're reactive. It's causing harm. Healthy, integrated anger allows us to stand up for our needs and for the needs of others. It helps us to identify when our boundaries have been crossed. Wounded light, when it comes to anger, means not being able to access your anger in the first place. And when we can't access our anger, we can't stand up for ourselves. We can't stand up for the people around us. Anger is important, but it is also important that it be balanced and that it be integrated. So this is all why, If you follow me on Instagram or you've seen my posts, I have a whole program on this, okay? A small group shadow work program. It starts in January. All the link is, all the information's below if you're interested. But this is why we're going through the 7 deadly sins in that program. And we're going to be looking at lots of different beings and deities and their stories and their archetypes so that we can really identify where wounded light and wounded dark is showing up in our lives and how we can balance them out, integrate them, and heal them. So, when it comes to shadow work, all of these various beings, ascended masters, angels, demons, deities, they all hold within them and their stories and their myths various archetypal wounds, archetypal patterns, and by working with them, they can really help us to get to that point in our shadow, to navigate our way to it, to understand it, and to heal it. By both studying their stories, as well as working with that, again, being or archetype within meditation as we navigate our shadow. Now, let's use Mary Magdalene as an example. I think a lot of people watching this are either familiar with Mary Magdalene or maybe have even worked with Mary Magdalene. Now, Mary Magdalene's story is vast and it is complex, and there are a lot of layers to her story. And because we will never know exactly what her story entailed when she was here on Earth, if you believe she walked the Earth as a human, we will never know which version of this is, in quotes, true, okay? Because depending on the pieces of her myths that we're talking about, we have, of course, that perhaps that she was the partner of Jesus, that she continued to minister after his death, that we have stories that say she landed in France and she had a whole ministry there. We also have stories that tell us she sat in a cave for 20 years or however many years it was after his death, again, in France. There are stories that portray her as a mother. There are stories, my point is, her story is vast and is complex. Of course, there's also the story where she was branded as a prostitute and all of these different things. So by working with Mary Magdalene, we can see aspects of ourselves in her. She can help us see those wounds in ourselves, and she can help us heal them. She can help us heal mother wounds in her aspect as a mother. She can help us heal authenticity wounds in how she continued to minister after the death of Jesus. We can work with her for healing, sex wounds and lust wounds in her role as a being that was branded a prostitute, which wasn't true. There are, of course, stories about her being sacred prostitute or a priestess of Isis and all these things. She, of course, lost the love of her life. So if we're grieving, her story can teach us, and she can hold us in our grief and teach us how sacred that grief is. So by working with her and her story, and in my opinion, or in meditation in our shadow, she can lead us to these places in ourselves. She can hold space for those, and she can show us how to integrate and heal them. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how to do this and what this looks like. When we're talking about shadow work, it very heavily overlaps any other deity work that you're doing or that you've seen people talk about, as far as like building an altar and leaving offerings and things like that. However, what we're trying to do, in my opinion, or in how I work for myself and with others, is we are trying to build a relationship with this deity or this being, so that there is trust going both ways, and they can help us to navigate our shadow, so that when we actually sit down into meditation, we get into a deep meditative state, and we call forth our guides, they can lead us to the memories that they want us to see, the pieces of our shadow that we're ready to uncover, these kinds of things. Now, in order to do that, it is important that there be trust established. And so it is very much a relationship that can take a little bit of time, especially depending on the being in question. Now, ancestral relationships and past life relationships, if either of those things are within your, are in alignment for you, are important here. So there are absolutely, in my experience, various beings who will very quickly and easily and happily work with anybody. Mother Mary, for example, is one of those, in my opinion. Then there are some who aren't. They're going to need a little bit more trust built first. And this is where past lives and ancestral relationships can really come into play. So if there is a patron saint or a patron deity of your familial line, that relationship can help to speed up the relationship building now, because there's already a rapport there. The same with past lives. So if there are deities or beings you've worked with extensively in past lives, very often when you reach out to them in this life, it will feel as if that channel is already there, as if that relationship is familiar. Now, when it comes to working with any guide of yours, I like to think about this like a phone line. In order to be able to work with them, to hear messages, hear in quotes, because it might be see, it might be a knowing, in order to receive messages from them in meditation and in your daily life, we need a clear phone line. And that phone line needs to go both ways. So our guides are always sending us messages, okay? Their end of the line is clear. But if our end of the line is not, we aren't going to be able to hear very well. Just like when I'm on my cell phone in the car, and my phone line sucks, my signal sucks, so it keeps cutting in and out, and I can't hear what the other person is saying, and it's very staticky, and it's very confusing, and we get mixed messages all the time. The same thing can happen with our guides. So if our end of the line isn't clear, we're going to have trouble getting those messages that they are consistently sending us. So when it comes to deity work, I believe that part of the practice, part of the first thing we want to do is be clearing out our end of the line and building that connection, building that channel, opening that channel between the two. Meditation can help with this. Offerings can help with this. Building an altar for them can help with this. All of those kinds of general deity work tips help with this, help to clear out that static, clear out that connection, so that you can actually receive the messages that they're trying to send you, whether that be in meditation or in your daily life. Along with those sort of, an altar, if you want to research the deities, if you want to work with Freya, research Freya, understand her stories and her myths and her legends. I recommend, but none of this is, of course, set in stone, an altar. And it can be very simple. You can start with a candle and a glass of water, maybe some incense if you have that. I don't personally burn a lot of incense. My respiratory tract is very sensitive. It makes me cough, okay? And I have a toddler in the house. I don't burn a lot of incense, but you can if that works for you. So an altar can be exceptionally simple. It does not have to be large or complicated. And offerings can be exceptionally simple. They don't have to be large or complicated. Starting there and then inviting or reaching out to that deity through tarot, oracle, if you use a pendulum, and in meditation, in order to start building that relationship really is kind of the first step here. And then, as you're building that relationship, this is what I do for myself and for others, is like I said before, when we sit down into meditation, we get into that really meditative state. I always start myself or others in our inner temple, and we can call forth our guides from there, and they can help us to navigate our shadow. Now, I'm going to end here because this video is getting long. If there's anything you would like me to elaborate on, if there's anything you would like me to create another video on, or you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask them in the comments below. If you want to learn more about the program I mentioned earlier, my 13-week deep dive into the shadow, that link is in the description below as well. And if you are interested in working with Goetic Infernals or any of the darker divine beings, I have a very special guest coming on the channel soon, so stay tuned for that because she's gonna give you all the details on that. So I will make sure to put that link below once it is posted on the channel. But if you're watching this as it's posted, it'll be a couple weeks. So if you have any questions, throw them in the comments below. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Bye.